Welcome to COGS, the Inventory Success Podcast, where we discuss how the top operators source, manufacture, finance, and sell their inventory in order to create successful businesses. I'm your host, Mike Gelb. I'm the community manager here at Manufactured. Manufactured is the inventory success platform for consumer and B2B companies. Now, what do we mean when we say inventory success? Well, we help SMBs manufacture, finance, and distribute inventory, their products across 20 categories. Look, if you're looking to help reduce your COGS, or you're looking for inventory financing help or selling into new channels, we're happy to see if we can help at manufactured.com. Now, I know this is a free podcast, but that doesn't mean I don't have a favor for you. If you're enjoying this show, please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening to this podcast on. That would really be amazing, and it would show that this content is helpful to you, which is awesome. If you could also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, that would mean a lot. And not only do we produce our own content to help educate and interview and learn with SMB owners, but we also throw events to help foster community around the US. So subscribe to be in the know when we're next doing an event at manufactured.com/events. The link is also in the show notes. Now, last week we talked with Joe Vandeman about building USA brands and manufacturing denim, flannel, and teddy bears in the US. Highly recommend checking out that episode. But this week, in this episode, we chat with Andi Caruso. Andi is the co-founder of Lyric Cycles. Lyric Cycles produces high-performance electric bikes whose mission is to replace 1 billion miles of gas-powered trips. We discuss why Andi joined her other co-founder, Andrew Lester, to co-found Lyric Cycles, their approach to their supply chain, approach to pricing, and the differences between their bikes versus less expensive e-bikes, the sales channel that she's most bullish on entering, and how they all approach launching new products and new SKUs. Without further ado, here's Andi. Andi, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Talk to me a little bit about the initial aha moment to founding Lyric Cycles, and what got you into bikes from like the beginning, and also and e-bikes.
Yeah. So my business partner, Andrew, actually started the company back in 2019, and I joined in November 21. So Andrew has always been really into mountain biking and is just like naturally a creator and entrepreneur at heart, as am I, very much an entrepreneur at heart. So he was just kind of toying around with ideas, for a new business, everything from socks, quite honestly, through to e-bikes. Given his passion for bikes, that's kind of why he started digging into that area, and then learning, everything he could about the e-bike industry, and really identifying the opportunity that existed. That's what kind of pushed him down that path. And then he started kind of sketching out different designs, and he's the type of person who literally knows everything about every possible competitor, every single bike they have. And, so he went down that path, and him and I actually worked together at a different company. We didn't really know each other super well. But then one of our common colleagues brought me into a different company they had started to do some marketing work. And so I consulted with that other company of theirs, and that's how Andrew and I really started working together. And so then, he eventually just asked me to be the co-founder as well. So I know I'm supposed to have some big aha moment about being obsessed with e-bikes, and that really honestly wasn't the case. It was that I'm a great marketer, and Andrew and I worked really well together, and he asked me to join. And quite honestly, I think the fact that I didn't have a ton of experience in this industry has actually played to our favor. So it kind of brings a different perspective.
Why then did you accept Andrew's offer? What attracted you about Lyric Cycles joining the team, and also joining as a co-founder?
Like I said, I'm very much an entrepreneur at heart. I grew up in a small business town. My parents had businesses. All my friends' parents had businesses. So I think it's just like naturally a part of me. I'm also a super like curious person and a problem solver. So being able to solve tough problems like excites me. And this was, something I had no experience in, but I obviously have a lot of marketing and strategy experience. And so I think for me, after the offer was kind of put on the table, I just looked into it a bit more and really identified that this was a very hot market in the very early stages and had huge potential. And at the time, I was also looking for a more meaningful way to put my skill set to use. I have a background in marketing, but a specialty in data and analytics and strategy overall. So I was kind of, looking for a way that I could put that to use to sort of make a bigger difference. And obviously e-bikes are a huge part of solving the climate crisis. So
what was different when you were joining Andrew, and as well as, maybe even like the positioning for Lyric Cycle? How did you think about what was unique about Lyric Cycles in terms of what kind of other players were doing?
We really got started during COVID, and I will say like that is when so many competitors popped up, because while a lot of companies sales were plummeting during COVID, e-bikes were the opposite. So everyone was trying to get in on that. And given that a lot of the manufacturing is done in China, there was, a number of white label designs. So many people were just picking up those white label designs off of Alibaba, throwing their branding on it and selling them that way. So where we're different is all of our designs are our proprietary designs. And where we really wanted to focus was, as opposed to, more of the traditional pedelec bikes, we wanted to offer an alternative to a car. So our larger vision is really to replace 1 billion miles of gas-powered trips with our bikes. So that means that, you need to be able to use this vehicle for anything under those 10-mile trips, which I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's so much of current traffic is traveling within those 10 miles. And you think about, a city like Los Angeles, or I was mentioning, I was just in New York last week. Traffic is so crazy in these two cities where it's actually way more convenient to use an e-bike. You get there faster. It's far more beneficial for the environment. It's more fun, and it's way more economical and affordable. So there's all these factors to consider. And I think that's where, when we designed, that's really what we had in mind, was a use case based approach, which is replacing those short haul trips.
How did you also all, and I know that this is also maybe part of Andrew's domain, but how did you all approach on the manufacturing side? Because as you were different, you weren't just kind of white labeling products and selling those products and slapping a brand on there. It seems like you are pretty involved and deep in the manufacturing. What does that actually mean from like that perspective?
Yeah. So initially what Andrew did, just to sort of get the lay of the land, was we did do a white label, because he wanted to see like, what are the costs going to be? How does this process even work? Like, is it feasible? So we did take a bike and then customized it and just did a really small run to get like I said, get the lay of the land. But then going forward, Andrew identified a number of manufacturers that were potential partners and was crafty in finding them, in looking at basically trying to find out who competitors had worked with so that they were legit. Because obviously there's so many manufacturers and you want to know who you're getting into bed with, essentially. And so, yeah, so he did a lot of that research, and we've done it in a few different ways. So I would say the best way to do it, and the way that I would recommend, is having your one core manufacturing partner. We've done a round where we did all of the sourcing, which, if you think of all of the components in a bike, it's a lot. So you're dealing with so many different manufacturers and suppliers, and to manage all of that is a huge lift. So I would say the best approach, and this is what we did with the first batch of bikes, was Andrew identified all of the components and like the specs that we wanted to bring to life, and provided, okay, these for the belt, for example, we definitely want to use this supplier. For the motor, we're open to various suggestions. For the controller, we want to use this one. So he identified, what was the must-haves that we definitely needed, and where there was room for them to source what made more economical sense ultimately. And then they managed that with the suppliers on their end and procured everything, and then ultimately did the assembly. But we've also done it where we did it in-house, and I wouldn't recommend doing that.
Using partner manufacturers, that definitely worked a lot better in terms of producing the bikes that you wanted versus actually becoming a bit more vertical. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's still super important to be on top of it and work very closely with the manufacturers, because there's a lot of, when you're dealing with overseas, like just even the time zone changes are a challenge. There's language barriers. So there's a lot that you do still need to work very closely with them. But yeah, I would suggest having your one core manufacturing partner, and then providing inputs to them as to like, these are the different components we want to use. These are the specs that we expect. And then, working with them to achieve that.
In terms of the specs, are you also saying we want you to work with this other manufacturer as well for the specs, or is the manufacturer kind of in charge in terms of actually, or given freedom in terms of actually how to actually build the bike that you want to your spec?
Well, we're building, and this was kind of a challenge we had early on, because a lot of the bikes are the same, and so they're used to building what they always build, whereas ours was a lot different. And so I think it's important that is made super clear, like so as an example, we use ASI controllers in some of our bikes, and there's the whole tuning model that needs to happen there. And so Andrew worked directly with ASI on that for our latest release, which is the Graffiti X, in tuning the acceleration and really getting that performance that we wanted. And that's not something that the manufacturer could have done, nor would they have wanted to. So I think it's not a cookie cut model for us, just because we are doing things a little bit differently. But where we can leverage our manufacturing partner, we will always lean on them. But then, if there's specific things that we want to do custom that don't fall in their realm, then we'll work with other suppliers and supplement that. And then that just all comes out in the wash. Like they'll, cut certain costs out of their bill of materials.
I understand that it's, there are a lot of customized components. I would say that when you think about even building new bikes as well, new product lines, like I know you mentioned the Graffiti, what typically is the hardest parts to actually source in your products or to actually build?
The longest lead time parts are, and this is Andrew's domain, but if I'm recalling correctly, the brakes are a bit longer lead time. The frames are all made by our manufacturer, so those do take some time. For a while there, we use a carbon belt drive on our bikes versus a chain. That was something that was quite back ordered. And then the controllers as well, but the lead times aren't as bad anymore like a year ago they were, because there was this false sense of demand based from COVID. And so everyone was overproducing, but now it's kind of back to normal.
So how do you think as well about, sales channels? If I understand correctly, D2C is your primary sales channel. What's the reason for that? How do you think overall about your channel strategy?
So I think starting out, e-commerce just made the most sense. My background is in that. And so it was something that as a small team, it was the easiest to do. The margins are also the highest there. So that was the easiest place to start and get a first batch sold, get them out, get feedback, because we didn't want to start going to dealers or retailers right away because we hadn't worked out the kinks in the products yet. So that would have just created probably a lot more problems than it would have, benefited. So, we're still primarily e-commerce. We do have some dealers now. Traditionally in the bike industry, the dealer model is what everyone will say you need to do. I don't necessarily believe that's the case. We love our dealers that we work with. But I think getting too many on board can almost do a disservice to everyone, because then each dealer isn't getting as much value as they could because they don't have exclusivity within their region. From the brand standpoint, the margins are a lot lower when you're dealing with retail. So for right now, I would say we're not at the stage where we have enough stock to get to everyone and sell all of our products. So if we have the choice of putting it in e-commerce and getting our full margin versus putting it in a dealer, we're probably going to take the margin right now, And so it's that fine balance though of, you do want to find great dealer partners to work with, and in those larger centers where people want to test ride, that's a great partnership. You also have to think about the post-sale experience and repairs and all of that. So having those partners to deal with that makes a lot of sense. So not saying we're not going to continue doing dealers, we are, but it's a more strategic way of working with them. And then I also think that there's a pretty big untapped opportunity in the B2B space, and that's where we're just getting started now. And that's that sweet spot in between e-commerce and dealers where the margins are, somewhere in the middle, but you're still getting the volume. And so we're exploring a few different models there within hospitality and more corporate type environments. So yeah, nothing too much has evolved just yet there, but we do know there's a lot of opportunity there, and it's just kind of a matter of having the time and resources to go for it.
I can certainly see it in from a B2B corporate hotels channel as well. You explore in a new town that you then offering guests to you use lyric cycles to actually go around town and everything.
It's almost the best way to explore vacation destinations, quite honestly.
I'm sure. I mean, I think that I think it's great too, because also, riding a bike, this, that experience of being out, the kind of the fresh air on you, and at the same time, you also don't need to know how to ride a bike. I mean, obviously from a balance perspective, you do, but you don't need to actually pedal, so hard and everything like that. So it actually opens the door up in terms of a lot of different types of people that actually, it makes it very accessible. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and our bikes all can seat 2 passengers, so it makes it, you only need one bike for a couple to get around.
There we go. How did you approach, especially since there was, as you mentioned, a wave of competition when it came to these white labeling bike companies? How did you think about approaching your pricing model?
We wanted to price ourselves competitively. We do have a really great product, and if we priced it for what it's truly worth in comparison with how others are pricing, it would have ended up being a higher price. But we didn't want to price ourselves out of the market. We're a new brand, so we wanted to be competitive, and we really wanted to have great value for the money our customers are spending. We're not the cheapest. We don't want to be the cheapest. We're not trying to race to the bottom. But anyone who really knows e-bikes and does the research, they see how we've built these things and designed them, and they're always like, wow, this is like priced very well. So you do get the people being like, what, $3,000 for a bike? That's crazy. And I'm like, well, no, it's they just haven't done the research. So, and that's fine. If someone's looking for a $1,200 bike, there's a lot of options out there. Have at it. We're not the right fit then.
Yeah, that makes sense, where it's not, so, inexpensive, where, can, because also I'm sure, since you also have, customizations when it comes to manufacturing, these are certainly a couple levels up from, the kind of the entry level, bikes that you could get on, that you can get, and I'm sure are much more long lasting.
Yeah, and they're more powerful, they're faster. They've got the carbon belt drive, which makes it really low maintenance. They seat 2 passengers. So it's like you can do all these things that on a more traditional bike you can't. Like hills are not a problem. You're not going to arrive somewhere sweaty because there's enough power. You can commute and bring another person with you. So there's a lot of different things. And even within the class of bikes that we do compete in, some of those features are not there. So again, it just like increases the value prop.
I have a question too in terms of sales channels, because I remember you saying how right now you're kind of putting a lot, you're primarily focused, you do have some retail partners, but you're primarily focused on direct to consumer, because of course you get much better margins for it. You may not quite have the volume that you might have if you go wholesale, but at the same time, that's okay, because at the same time you might not be able to produce. You might be able to only produce so many units. If you were able to, if you, for example, were able to produce, let's say, a lot more units, for example, of your, and maybe you get great, financing terms, or however in terms of actually financing inventory, would you, in terms of sales channels, would you double down or triple down further on D2C, or would you actually then start exploring more retail partners?
Well, our plan is, we'll bring in more channels. So we would basically, within 3 years, the split should be 50% e-commerce, 30% dealers, 20% B2B. And that's broken down by the bike and the different use cases for the bike. So we do have multiple models spanning from your more traditional e-bike, and I'll use traditional in quotations because it's not super traditional, but your e-bike through to your kind of moped, which is like the Graffiti X that goes 45 miles an hour, and then up to more the electric motorcycle, which is the Voodoo. So depending on the sales channel, or depending on the model, you're going to have different sales channels and different use cases. So like going back to hospitality, we're not going to be using the Voodoo that goes 65 miles an hour at a hotel, because that's just not, there'll be a lot of insurance issues there. So that's not going to happen. So we think through all these things, like in creating our strategy and our projections. And it's like, okay, so this bike we can use for these different things, so we can sell it in these different sales channels at this percentage. And we're getting down to that level when we're actually planning. And then the distributions I just mentioned is how it kind of rolls out based on what we could reasonably achieve. And then in order to get those other sales channels moving, like the plan is to hire business development, like salespeople, to really work on the dealer market and build those relationships. And so
how do you also think about, I understand too, the strategy around, okay, we have these different models, what model actually works in this specific channel that we actually should be selling to? How do you also think about launching new SKUs and new bikes? What's typically the cadence when it comes to that, and what maybe needs to happen in order for you all to consider creating a new bike?
I would say if the biggest learning that we've had along this journey is do one thing and get it through to so that it's like in production and it's pretty seamless before introducing another product. we've, both Andrew and I think get really excited about all the opportunities, and there's so many things you can do. And it's really like, okay, we've now got the Graffiti X, and the Voodoo, which again are three completely different products. And I would just say, do one and get it sorted before you move on to the next. When it comes to accessories and that sort of thing, obviously we're introducing new things as we come across cool products, or need the accessories to be able to really bring whatever use case it is to life. So it's like, if it's an Uber delivery driver, you obviously need the rack and everything to go along with that, and for them to be able to deliver the food. So we're thinking about it in terms of how is this going to be used. Another one that we're looking at is for golf courses. So you're starting to see them pop up, but like having the golf bag attachment to use instead of a golf cart, for example. So that would be an accessory that we are looking to develop. But I think ultimately what it comes down to circle back to your original question, is there a market for it? Is there a need? Oftentimes it's coming from customer feedback. So we did our first version of the Graffiti, and we got overwhelming feedback, like, why is there no rear suspension on this model? So we're like, okay, well, we need to build a model that has rear suspension on it because people want it, and there's already a demand for that. And so then it evolved from that, thinking through, okay, well, if we want to be able to have a lower entry cost and kind of go a bit more mass, appeal to more people, we need to bring the cost down. But also, not everyone cares about going, like the first Graffiti went 38 miles an hour. I don't want to go 38 miles an hour. Like, I'm good just like cruising in the bike lane, and 20, 25 miles an hour is good for me. And there's a lot of people like me out there. So then we decided to split that, and really then looked at it holistically from a brand lineup perspective. We didn't want there to be two bikes that were pretty much the same thing. We needed to leave space between them so that it was clear, as whoever's coming to the site, it's pretty obvious which product is going to be a fit for them.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Also makes sense to not launch more products, because I can only imagine how complex it is to actually launch a new bike. I mean, speaking of which, talk to me a little bit about from a cash flow perspective, how you all think about cash flow, because I'd imagine these bikes from a lead time perspective take a long time to produce. And then also from a sales perspective, because it is such a large purchase, it's not, probably somebody going, hey, I'm going to buy an e-bike today, right? So how do you think overall, and then of course, those two kind of, you have those two elements in effect that of course can make cash flow very draining and very hard. So how do you think about cash flow management and from like an inventory perspective as well?
I am a huge Excel nerd. I love modeling data. So this is definitely my jam. So we kind of start, like, we have our larger 3-year projections, which are going to bring in all of our cash flow. And that's, I don't want to say it's at a high level because it's at a very granular level, but that would be from like a further out planning perspective. That's the document we use to really go through the things like, okay, we're going to basically to figure out how much cash we do need to execute. So there's like the planning for cash, and then there's the managing the cash, in how I would look at it. So the planning for cash is then, okay, let's, from a bottom up kind of approach to building the model, let's say, I guess it's a bit of top down, bottom up, but we're going to start with production, because we can't really sell products that we don't have. We do, but that's not the ideal way you want to do it. So it's sort of starting like, okay, we're going to build X number of units of this. We can reasonably double that the following year and again. And then we're introducing this model. So we build the production side. Then we're going through all the sales strategy, and I'm thinking through things like what we already chatted about. Which sales channels are we introducing? How many people do we need to capture these results? What sort of sales are we doing, incorporating Black Friday, all of those types of things. Now we have our sales. So we have our cash coming in from sales. And then you have to think through all the financing side of it, your interest costs, investment. And so then we're getting basically to the point of, in order to execute on this plan, we're going to require X amount of investment and X amount of like lender financing or inventory financing. Then the real world comes along and crushes your dreams. I'm just kidding. But no, then you have to deal with the reality. And so you are thinking about lead times and all of that planning. And I think like when you're planning, always put in a buffer because you're going to need it. Things always take longer than you think they're going to take. And then in a case where you have a seasonal business, again, like if you miss the season, those sales are just gone. It's not like they're just delayed. They're just gone for that period of time. So you have to think about that in planning as well. But then on the actual management side of it, we have a weekly tracker where every week it's like updating our bank balances, the credit cards, like wherever things are at, what needs to be paid that week. And it's like planned out till the end of the year. And so this is where then, we have our whole system of upload the invoices that need to be paid as they are paid. We're marking that down, tracking our sales that are coming in and, are we on target? Are we below target for, all those different areas, whether it's sales or expenses. So we're pretty diligent about it now because it is a very cash intensive business and a lot of companies are not doing so well because they've mismanaged cash. And so we're just, you see that in the industry. And so we're trying to be really cautious about that and make sure that we're spending our money wisely and managing it really well.
No, that's really helpful. That's really helpful in terms of how, because I mean, as you say, it never quite goes the way that you want it to in the model, right? I mean, at the same time, it is a model, right? It's not actual reality. So you have to also kind of put up guardrails too. That okay, delays are going to happen. Things are going to come up. Do you also have issues when it comes to like selling out? If you've had products that have sold out?
We have sold probably like 75% of our total sales in pre-sale because we have brought a bunch of new bikes to market. So we utilized what would be considered the Indiegogo model, but did it internally so that we could keep more money, basically. And I know how to do all that stuff anyway. So we've kind of perfected the launching model, and we had the pre-sale in January for the Graffiti X was amazing.
I guess when you launch products, you then have 75% sale sold up front. So then you only then need to sell 25%. Is that also when you're kind of ordering new inventory to make sure you're not selling out?
Well, this is where the cash flow side of it comes in, and like where, you need those extra tools, like whether it's you need investment cash or lenders, because it's pre-selling is tough because people are giving you their money up front and then they're going to have to wait 6 months or, for the product. No one loves that. So for us, there's a big opportunity if we can increase our stock, like our conversion rates increase for sure because people want it and they want it now. And then there's also, when you're doing pre-sales, you have to think about the return factor because as people wait, they decide they don't want to wait. And so there's this period where, you spend all the money to acquire the customer and then, then you have to reacquire them because that customer wants their money back, which that goes away when you have stock. And so we're right now like working to be able to increase the stock that we have on hand so we can scale our sales. But it's just like a balancing act of like how much how much cash do you have to really go put the orders in? So it is, yeah, just playing that game basically.
When you do have, positive cash flow, and how do you typically utilize it? Is it reinvesting and also being to create more inventory? How do you kind of approach to actually allocate that cash?
Yeah, it has been to go to inventory because, like I said, we have been kind of operating in like a pre-sale model for the most part. So we would love to be able to have, more stock and make sure that we're fully stocked up for those really important sales periods, which obviously it's a very seasonal business. So having adequate stock throughout the spring and summer, having all of that stock so that it's going to ship for Christmas. So really hitting those timelines is super important. And then, as we bring cash in the door, focusing more, like being able to spend more in marketing, will really help us out. So once we have that stock, then it's, great. Transitioning to let's grow the team and be able to really sell more, which we've been really scrappy and resourceful. And I grew up operating on no marketing budgets in the jobs I've had previously where we had to get, really creative. So I'm used to that mentality. But it would be lovely to have more money to work with on the marketing side. Absolutely.
On D2C too, you're a Canadian company. I believe you sell in Canada and both the US. When did you expand to the US, selling to the US? And also, how do you think about, obviously, I know you're very, very focused on D2C, that the channel. How do you think about as well different regions in terms of selling to?
We started selling in North America immediately, like all over. So Canada's a tough market because, particularly for bikes, like the season's so short, right? Because it's winter most of the year. um, so we started selling immediately. We are obviously a Canadian company, so we're always going to have bikes available for Canadians, but it is cheaper to sell to US customers also. So there's like the acquisition cost is cheaper in the US, again, just because I think there's potentially like less there's more reason to buy it when you can ride it year round. And, obviously the southern states are our biggest markets as well. So it makes sense. But in thinking about expanding, like to other markets, I think that's like what you were meaning. Yeah. Yeah. So we do have a distributor now in Australia. So they're working on getting that set up now. And so they will be available there. For us right now, we are open to the distributor model in other countries, but we've barely scratched the surface of North America. And so we want to really keep our resources focused here because, as you know, like once the ball gets rolling, you just build momentum. And I think like we're really close to, like, the momentum is really exciting right now. I wouldn't say like we're blowing up just yet, but we're getting really close to that point. And that's when, all of the work really starts paying off. And so I don't think it would make sense for us right now to go to Europe. And there's also a whole other side of it that needs to be considered in that, is like regulations. So the power regulations for e-bikes, where they're 750 watts here, they're 250 watts in Europe, so there's a whole thing that needs to be, like the bike setup needs to be changed. And then you got to consider like repairs and warranty and shipping there, or do you just, it's basically setting up a whole nother business. So like I said, we're open to doing the distribution model where we're going to take, obviously a smaller margin, but it's pretty hands off. Then it's like, hey, here's the products. We'll pass on some of the marketing material to them and help them with insights and, strategy, but it's up to them to manage it then.
Makes sense. On the warehousing side, do you typically, since on the maybe on the U.S., the southern states are maybe the strongest market. Australia also makes total sense since it's so hot there all the time. But and the middle is a desert. But on the southern states, how do you think about warehousing the actual bikes? Are they typically like one warehouse in Canada or mostly Canada, and then you're shipping direct to each individual customer? Are you also trying to save costs when it comes to warehousing in different sectors of different parts of the US as well? So it's just a little bit cheaper on when you actually do the last mile fulfillment?
Yeah. So right now we have one warehouse in the US and then our headquartered warehouse in Canada. We're going to be moving to split the US warehouse into two pretty quick. So right now it's based in Salt Lake City, which is kind of, center, easy to get everywhere, but they do have another location closer to the East Coast to service that market as well. So we started out just with the one as we were kind of ramping up, but yeah, we'll be splitting it so that it'll be cheaper to kind of get, and they do all the last mile for us. So we're shipping direct from China to the warehouses, and then they deal with all of the logistics, which is great.
Final question for you. What would you value more? $100 of inventory, $100 of COGS, or $100 cash?
The inventory, because we need more inventory right now,
cool.
Which will turn into
cash.
A lot more in cash. Yeah.
There you go. Awesome. Andi, well, thank you so much for your time. This has been so much fun. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
And there you have it. Thanks again, Andi, for coming on the show. If you're enjoying this show, we have a favor. Please subscribe on whatever channel you're listening to this podcast on. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening.